Welcome to the bonus episode of Remote Control featuring the post-production audio team from the Beatles' Get Back. We have with us sound mixer Mike Hedges and sound editor Martin Kwok. Welcome, Mike and Martin.
Hey, great to be here.
Pleasure to be with you.
So, jumping right in, there was some revolutionary technology and work that you did to isolate and improve the sound quality of different audio tracks that were pretty unintelligible on the original mix. Can you give us an overview of what the immediate challenges you faced were when you heard the original audio files? And when you realized you had some technology that might be able to resolve them, I believe it was called MAL, is that correct? On a side note, I understand that there's a story behind how you came up with the name of that, so if you could cover that too. I'm really curious about how you thought you might be solving this problem of the audio.
Peter's certainly an incredible storyteller and documentarian on this level as well. What we had in those tapes was a lot of history that he needed to uncover, but we were very much dealing with a lot of extraneous noise or the band jamming, a lot of other set noise and so forth. So it was very difficult to get the narrative that we wanted the audience to understand through. At that point in time, we really didn't have a solution for it. We looked at all the possible commercial gear that was available. We're very adept in using isotope RX and so forth, but we also visited the New Zealand Police, who have a Cedar Cambridge system, and had a look at the broadband noise reduction there. Still wasn't going to quite cut it with regard to singling out voices from, say, guitar overtones and drums and so forth. But the nascent technology of the neural network stuff, or the artificial intelligence that has started to really come on stream now, was starting to filter into the game. And we're very lucky to have some super smart people that we work with, sound editors, but also people that understand coding and work with software development as well. So the combination of that allowed us to look at that avenue as something to explore. And within a couple, 3 weeks, we found that there was going to be something in there. And that developed dramatically over the course of the 9-10 months that we were posting properly through last year, 2021.
That's amazing. And so it was a glimmer of hope, it looks like, right? At that point?
It was, yeah. It was very much just a glimmer to begin with, but we thought, well, we'll use what we can. At that point, the technology really only returned an 8 kilohertz return. So nothing that we could put forward to Mike and Brent to mix with, certainly not for a near-field Dolby Atmos surround track. But we were still thinking, look, if it's something that can just sit on top of the original Nagra to provide a little bit more definition and detail to the dialogue, then we're still winning. So we were happy to keep channeling down that path. Thankfully, Emile Delaray, Andrew Moore, who were the machine learning engineers and machine learning developers that are on our team, they just doggedly stuck at the task and kept digging deeper and deeper. And after a number of months, as the training that we were doing, as well as the models that were being created specifically for the show, turning into, as you were suggesting, MAL, which, by the way, stands for Machine Audio Learning. However, it is very much a nod to Mal Evans, the Beatles road manager, who we're deeply fond of as a character within the whole Get Back setup and his support for the band. So it all felt very relevant to have Mal on our side. What Emile was able to achieve over the course of a few months was nothing short of remarkable. As well as the team pitching in to make this all happen. But we were very lucky that Emile had the nous to be able to get under the hood and keep tweaking things in a way that would expand the actual use of the machine learning. And there was a point where the returns that we were getting, he was able to get the models that we were using all the way to 48K. And at that point, it was an absolute game changer. We knew that there was nothing else on the planet that was doing that, at least nothing that we knew of. And it's prompted us in the editorial side to effectively go back to beginnings and start cutting the show again, because the results were so dramatic that it really warranted a clean editorial approach. So it was one of those things that totally changed the game for us, not only in how we were able to treat the audio, but how we also edited and therefore mixed the audio as well.
And now, in terms of mixing, Mike, was there an occasion to need pre-dubs or at least temp dubs on the film where you were constantly getting a different version of the same element?
Yeah, it's a great question, Buzz. I think, as Martin has alluded, when we started the process, the quality of separation was nowhere near what we ended up with. And thankfully, funnily enough, COVID hitting allowed us a breathing window to actually develop Mel to the degree of, wow, we can now hear all of this stuff. And you may say that's a great thing, but suddenly you've got a director who is a master storyteller and an editor who is just as crazy, deciding, okay, we can now hear all of this stuff, and so we're gonna put it in. And so the parts 1, 2 grew, shrunk. We were mixing what we were being provided with, and as Martin alluded, when Emil and the guys got to a stage of being able to separate all the instruments, suddenly the ball game changed, and suddenly we could make sure that the dialogue that was, again, to be protected, could also be mixed in with what was really happening on each of the stages. So pre-mixing became a running sort of trial where we would mix a day, and as Martin said, we had these days that we would separate. Brent would be working on one, I'd be working on another day. We would swap them to make sure that you get into a mindset of, oh, we've got to clean the dialogue, we've got to make sure the drums are going to be heard as they would have heard them in Savile Row. So the whole idea is actually to be a fly on the wall. You'd be hearing this stuff loud. You'd be still wanting the intelligibility, but the main thing was, this is the Beatles. These are songs that are being created, and so the premixing was, hell, what can we get clean? How do we make it sound great? How are we going to give Peter what he really wants as a Beatles fan, to be able to say, hey, I'm presenting them in a totally new way. I'm telling the story, and Mel was an amazing tool to be able to do all of that with. And as storytellers, we were able to, constantly upgrade the days, which turned into weeks.
So as you've heard from probably everybody, what you've done is absolutely amazing. The way I describe it to people is you've unmixed paint. You've created this amazing, rich soundtrack that never would have existed had it not been for these incredible tools. So we do have a 1.5-minute sequence, which is amazing, of the band in the studio warming up with their instruments and having some fun, bantering back and forth. And we're then able to see and hear you isolate out these tracks of just the dialogue, just the music, and then culminating in a full stereo mix at the end. So if you could tell us how you were able to achieve that and what went into this process related to this clip, and see what your roles were in creating that, it would be great. So let's take a look at the clip.
Wow. Can you get somebody to buy me those lace, those bow ties?
A cowboy.
A black one.
A cowboy.
Yeah, but they get them that just clip on under.
Yeah. So what should we do that's fun besides work?
Val, can you send somebody to buy me those lace, those bow ties?
A cowboy.
A black one.
A cowboy.
Yeah, but they get them that just clip on under.
Yeah. So what should we do that's fun besides work?
Val, can you send somebody to buy me those lace, those bow ties?
A cowboy.
A black one.
A cowboy.
Yeah, but they get them that just clip on under.
Yeah. So what should we do that's fun besides work?
I mean, off the bat, I've got to say, looking at that clip again, I realized that it's certainly one of the clips that is not as problematic as many others, but it shows how used to using the technology we got. But it is, of course, very important across the board to have these sort of sequences play with as much intelligibility as possible. And that was the problem with the original sound source. You're talking about a sound recorder who has a boom that's swinging over the room and sort of trying to track what's going on. But in this instance, we're kind of interested in George, talking about his bow tie and a little offhanded comment, talking with John and stuff like that. And there was enough confusion going on in the room for that to be a little unclear. Some noise floor issues, some buzz and this and that, and some off-mic business. So what we were able to do through MAL, the machine learning, was isolate just the voices and then take the inverse of that being the noise. But on top of that, and this is quite a difference, I think, with regard to other things that are starting to come onto the market, we were also able to then take some of the voice layer and separate those out separately. So we had George on his own, John on his own, that sort of thing, to be able to recombine them. The technology that we're using within the machine learning was all about source separation, so nothing regenerative as such. If you were able to hear it in the track, we were able to isolate it. And at one point, we realized that some of the off-mic stuff was still problematic. So at that point, Emil started to lean into pretty much the nascent stages of regeneration, which is the unfiltering. So we were able to bring some of those background voices that would otherwise always be off-mic in the Nagra and just bring them forward so you've got a better balance. And that was ultimately important to be able to tell the story. We needed to be able to make sure that Mike and Brent and Lex had the ability to focus the attention for the audience for where Peter wanted the conversation to go.
Yeah, and I think, Martin, it's a great point that, the capabilities of that separation, also, you've got to think this was back in 1969. The microphones of the day were not fantastic. And our job is, okay, we want to tell the story as real as possible, but we want to actually fill that audio dynamic, the frequencies that we want to. So we were not only just getting separation, we were able to EQ John's voice compared to Paul, compared to George, and therefore you made the sound an inviting thing. We're telling a story here. We don't want people to hear a thin, scratchy karaoke style of separation here. The importance of MAL was that we could tell the story how it should be told and how important those little jokes were in all of this process. And the phase coherentness of the split is so vital because there is noise, there is buzz. We don't want to eliminate that. We want to celebrate the sound that was captured on the day. And it's always a battle as a mixer. I'm coming in not being party to the hours of cleanup and of separation. My job is to go, hey, yeah, it sounds pretty good, but I think we could add a little bit of reverb or something to enhance the whole process. I'm not going to recreate an amazing sound field, but we've got to be able to say, hey, this is how these guys would have been all listening and relating to one another. We're telling a story here of a band who were really good mates. They were there enjoying what they're doing. They had a massive task to create, and so they were figuring out what to do, but they were also living their life. George is talking about his bow tie. Well, do we need to know that? Yeah, you do, because that's part of who the Beatles are. It's important.
No, that's incredible, and it does put the whole experience of being in the studio with the Beatles under a microscope that normally we would never be able to experience, right?
Right.
It really is a miracle. So now next up, we have another sequence from I've Got a Feeling, where you've used the AI and machine learning, Mal, to isolate the tracks for the vocals, guitar, bass, and drums. So let's take a look at the clip.
Oh no. I hate to miss the train, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
think this is the next phase of Mal's development, really, where after we'd figured out a way to get the voices extracted from everything else, we then started to channel in on individual instruments for mixability, editing, as well as mix control. So in this sequence, iconic moment in terms of Paul sharing I've Got a Feeling with the band pretty much for the first time, and you can just see the band find their way through it. If you notice, actually, if you're able to listen in like a stereo environment, in this instance, because of the separation, we're able to follow the camera pan for one moment, which otherwise would have just been a mono source. So it's part of that start of the spatializing. But it also highlighted the way that it became important to us to be able to honor all of the instruments that the band brought to the table and make sure that there was a sense of balance with that. So yes, all of those different instruments had different models within Mal that we could extract those elements and therefore rebalance where required to give something that made you really feel like you were in Twickenham. And that was the magic that Mike and Brent brought to the table in terms of what we were able to extract and then actually spatialize.
Yeah, magic. I think the magic's in those 4 superstars. But again, it comes down, this is at Twickenham, so this is in the first part of Get Back. I remember, Marty, that we actually mixed this a few times as Mel developed. Obviously, we got better at separation, better at the noise floor, better at identifying and getting the full-bodiedness of each of those components. And it's really important because you see on their faces and they tell the story. This is Paul sharing with the band, hey, this is I've Got a Feeling, and how they work. And as the series progressed, we see that again and again, that when they're working hard, they're all focused and they all do their thing. And Ringo starts playing and George comes in and John is fidgety a lot of the time and really bringing what they do to the song. And I think for me, the magic of all of this whole series has been, we've been privileged enough to be a part of the band because, we are now, and I say that with the greatest of humility, of course, but we're now actually letting the band hear. And I'm sorry that we don't have John and George with us, but we have the experience of what the hang these guys did in that time. And Twickenham was foundational, and you saw what a massive studio and what a massive facility. And you can imagine, the sound recordist of the day, Peter Sutton, he just he did a remarkable job. And I think I've spoke of this before, where we would have nothing without what he did on the day and on the weeks and the time. Those recordings were like gold to us. And I think what we did was we took Mal, we actually provided the separation that I'm sure he would have wanted to provide for Lindsay Hogg in the day for his documentary or feature film. And I think, what a privilege to be able to pull it all apart and put it all back together. It's really been great.
It really is remarkable. And I think one of the things that struck me was as you mentioned, the spatialization was important, but that's what made us feel like we're in on The Secret, in a sense. We were in there with the band. I can't imagine what this would have sounded like in mono with the original Niagara recordings. It would have been a documentary that we heard part of and didn't really feel part of, So I think what you've done is you've completely flipped the narrative and made us part of this thing. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Buzz. Great questions. And it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I'm a huge fan. I'm truly a huge fan. So thank you for everything you do.
Thanks for your time, Buzz.
Well, that's it for this bonus episode of Remote Control. Thanks to sound mixer Mike Hedges and sound editor Martin Kwok. We look forward to continuing to hear your work in the future, and we hope to hear your names called at the Emmys in September. So be sure to like this episode, share your comments, and subscribe to the AIS channel. We want to thank Gary Radburn and Matt Allard at Dell, Rick Champagne at NVIDIA, The NAB Show, Computer Graphics World, and Post Magazine, Michael Mansouri and Meatmo for their Meatmo production platform. And of course, a very special thanks to Wingnut Films, Apple Corps, and Disney Plus for sharing their talented team and some of the materials behind their documentary series, The Beatles Get Back. Thank you for watching this episode of AIS Remote Control, brought to you by Dell.